It hadn't rained in 5 months. Not a drop, not a cloud, not a reason to keep hoping the land would ever give back what it took. The wind carried dust in little gusts across the dry fields, kicking it up against the sagging barn like the land itself was trying to erase what little was left. Trees stood stripped and brittle. The creek had turned to a cracked bed of gray. And in the middle of it all stood a woman named Leah, sleeves rolled, fingers caked with earth that refused to grow anything but disappointment. She was tall for a woman, with shoulders shaped by hard work, not choice. Her skin had gone dry from sun and wind, and her brown hair was always tied back, mostly to keep it out of her eyes where she bent low to pull dying weed from the garden that no longer fed them. Her boots had holes in the soles, patched twice already. Her hands trembled, not from fear or cold, but from a tiredness that never went away, not even after sleep. Inside the house, if it could still be called that, her daughter sat on the wood floor near the fireplace that hadn't held flame since spring. The girl's name was Annie. She was 7, but small, her voice soft as cotton and her eyes too big for her face. She watched her mother with the kind of silence that made Leah ache in places she didn't have words for. Children weren't supposed to understand hunger like that. They weren't supposed to stop asking for more. The morning started like all the others. Leah kneaded leftover flour into a paste and fried it with a bit of salt. It wasn't real food, but it was hot, and it filled the air with a smell that made you think of better meals. She served the piece to Annie and sipped water herself. There wasn't enough for both. They'd come out west because her husband swore there was land here. Work. A new start. He'd been wrong on all counts. When he left 2 years ago, claiming he'd ride to town and come back with help, Leah believed him. She waited. A week. Then a month. Then the sheriff's boy passed word that a man had been found face down in a riverbed 2 counties south. Nothing on him but a broken belt and a ring with 3 notches inside. One for Leah, one for Annie, and one he never explained. She didn't cry that day. She just stopped believing in what she couldn't hold. Now, the days were measured by how many hours she could work before the sun drove her inside. And the nights were full of whispering, Annie's quiet questions about whether God had ears, and Leah's even quieter answers. There was no money left, no neighbors close enough to ask for help, and nothing to sell except her wedding band, which she'd buried under the floorboards long ago, next to the old picture of her husband. She didn't hate him, but sometimes she whispered his name just to see if it still made her angry. That morning, after Annie had finished eating, Leah packed the last of the eggs, 2, both with cracks, and wrapped them in an old kerchief. She told Annie to put on her best dress, the blue one with the missing button. Annie didn't ask where they were going. She just looked up, blinked, and reached for her shoes. The left one was tight now. She had outgrown it weeks ago. They walked. The town of Marigold sat 9 miles west, down a dirt road that was so dry it split in places like burnt skin. They passed 2 wagons and 1 rider, none of whom stopped. People didn't look you in the eye out here if you looked too thin. They just kept on. Leah didn't blame them. By the time they reached the edge of town, Annie's lip was bleeding from where the wind had chapped it raw, and Leah could feel the burn behind her knees. Still, she kept her back straight as they walked past the general store and into the livery yard. She paused, her eyes locked on the rancher's house just behind the split-rail fence. The barn looked clean. Smoke came from the chimney. Someone lived here. Someone who might need a hand. A man stepped out of the barn before she could knock. He wasn't old, maybe in his 30s, with a long frame and a face carved by weather. His eyes were hard to read, dark under the brim of his hat. He didn't speak at first, just looked at Leah, then at the girl beside her, then back again. Before Leah could say a word, Annie stepped forward, chin up, voice steady in that way only a child can manage when the grown-ups can't. "Mama just needs a job, sir." That was all. The man's brow moved a little, just enough to show surprise. Leah's throat clenched. She hated this. Hated standing here like she was begging. She wasn't. Not really. But there was no pride in being proud when your child's ribs started to show. "I'll work for meals," she said finally. "Don't need money." Just food. A place to sleep, maybe. Just for a little while. The man didn't say no, but he didn't say yes either. He looked at the barn, then the girl, then back at Leah like he was trying to make sense of something he didn't expect. The silence stretched. Then he nodded. Once. You can muck stalls. Sweep out the feed room. There's water by the well. I'll show you. He turned and walked, and Leah followed, one hand resting lightly on Annie's back. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't kindness. Not really. It was something else. Maybe guilt. Maybe loneliness. She didn't care. What mattered was that Annie would sleep with a full belly tonight. Maybe 2 nights if Leah worked fast. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horses hit her like a memory she hadn't meant to remember, of days when she still laughed, when life wasn't something you had to survive. She blinked and reached for the broom without being told. Behind her, the man said, "Name's Jack." She nodded, not looking up. "Leah." He turned to go, then paused. "Kit can sit on the porch. Shade's good there." Leah glanced down at Annie, who nodded and walked off like she belonged there. It broke Leah a little how easily her daughter could slip into new places, like she'd done this too many times already. She swept for hours. The sun dropped low, throwing gold across the barn beams. Her arms ached, her stomach roared, but she didn't stop until the dust was gone and the feed room floor was clean enough to sleep on. Later, after Annie had fallen asleep curled on an old folded blanket on that same floor, Leah sat just outside the barn door, staring at the stars. She could hear the wind in the trees and a far-off coyote howl. Somewhere behind her, Jack's boots thudded softly on the porch boards. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching maybe. Leah didn't ask why he let them stay. Didn't ask if they'd be allowed to stay longer. Tomorrow would bring its own kind of hunger. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, they weren't alone. The barn was still dark when Leah woke. Her back ached from the hard floor, and her arms throbbed where yesterday's work had dug deep into muscle. But Annie was still asleep, curled tight under the old wool blanket Jack had left without a word. That was something, enough to quiet the ache in her stomach for now. Leah stepped outside into the gray wash of morning and stretched, her bones popping in protest. The yard was quiet except for the soft clucking of hens and a few horses stomping in their stalls. She found a bucket near the well and began hauling water before anyone had to ask. It was easier that way, doing the job before someone questioned if you could. She'd learned that early, back when her own mother worked herself half to death, keeping a boarding house upright after her husband ran off. Leah had been 12 then, old enough to scrub floors and carry trays. Old enough to understand that men left and women stayed behind to pick up what was broken. Jack didn't speak much, but he noticed everything. He'd stepped onto the porch that second morning, hat low over his eyes, and stood watching her for a long minute as she watered the horses. He didn't tell her what to do, just gave her a short nod before heading to the field out back with a rusted plow and a mule that looked almost as tired as the land. It went on like that for days. He'd leave her a task, stack wood, mend a fence rail, patch a feed bag, and she'd do it before he returned. Annie stayed close, quiet but never scared, as if she knew this piece was fragile and needed to be handled gentle. She played in the dirt, talked to the chickens, and once tried to climb onto the mule before Leah caught her. Jack didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched like he might have, once upon a time. They didn't talk about why Leah and Annie had come. They didn't talk about where Jack had been, either. But silence had a way of speaking louder than most words, and over time, Leah started to hear things in the way he moved, in the way he stood too long staring at the hills when he thought no one saw. On the 6th day, just before dusk, another rider came. Leah was inside the barn gathering kindling when the sound of hooves turned her still. Jack stepped out of the field slow, the plow forgotten mid-row. The rider dismounted like he owned the dirt under his boots. He was tall, sharp-jawed, and wore the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Leah could tell right away. This man didn't come for coffee or company. "Evening, Jack." the man said, voice slick like oil. Jack didn't move. Sawyer. The name curled Leah's spine. Sawyer took off his hat and slapped it against his leg, knocking off a layer of dust. Didn't think you were still playing farmer. Thought after what happened with the Dunmore deal, you'd be halfway to Montana. Jack didn't answer, just shifted his weight and glanced once toward the barn. Leah stayed still, crouched behind the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what the Dunmore deal was, but the way Sawyer said it, like a bruise pressed too hard, meant it mattered. And it meant trouble. Sawyer laughed, always with a quiet type. Look, I'll keep this simple. I got buyers coming through. They're paying more for land than it's worth. This patch here, it's a gold mine. You sell now, you walk away with clean hands. Wait too long, and you might not walk away at all. Jack's voice came low, even. I'm not selling. Sawyer scared and slid the hat back on. Shame. Be a pity if some accident happened out here. A lot of fires this time of year. Dry land like this, it only takes a spark. He mounted slow, then tipped his head toward the house. Pretty little girl you've got running around. Not yours, I reckon. Still, might want to keep her out of sight when folks come looking. He rode off without waiting for a reply. Jack didn't move until the dust had settled. Then he turned back toward the barn, eyes narrowing when he caught sight of Leah stepping out, hands clenched. Who is he, she asked. Jack's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he didn't want to spit out. Trouble, he said. Old kind. You don't need to worry about him. But Leah had seen the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his fingers twitched at his side where a gun should have been. She knew better. Trouble didn't knock unless it had a reason. And Sawyer had come for something. That night, after Annie had fallen asleep with her cheek pressed against Leah's side, Jack brought in 2 mugs of coffee and set one beside her. He didn't sit close, just lowered himself onto an overturned crate across from her and stared into the dark. I used to ride with him, he said after a while. We ran land deals. Some legal, most not. I got out a year ago. Bought this place from a widow who couldn't keep up with it anymore. Figure I'd fix it. Live quiet. But men like Sawyer don't forget when you walk away. Leah sipped the coffee. It was strong and bitter, like truth. I'm not asking for protection, she said quietly. But I won't let him scare me off either. Jack looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. I know. In the days that followed, the tension tightened. Sawyer didn't return, but Jack became more watchful. He started locking the barn, checking the fence lines before bed. Leah caught him oiling a rifle late one evening, sitting on the porch with his back to the door. It wasn't long before another presence arrived. Not a man this time, but a girl. Her name was Rachel. She was Jack's younger sister, barely 20, with wind-tangled blonde hair and a sharp tongue that cut straight through silence. She rode up on a borrowed mule, dragging a cart with sacks of flour and canned goods behind her. Don't tell me you're starving to death out here, she barked, jumping down. I saw Sawyer 3 days back. Said you were about to get burned off the map. Jack hugged her, a brief, awkward thing, then pulled back. You shouldn't have come. Rachel rolled her eyes and walked past him toward Leah and Annie. So you're the ones he took in? Leah nodded. I'm Leah. This is Annie. Rachel crouched to meet the girl's eyes. You like horses? Annie nodded shyly. Good. I've got one with a crooked ear and more sass than sense. Maybe you can teach her manners. Leah felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. Rachel was a whirlwind, but a kind one. She brought noise, warmth, the scent of lavender on her shawl. And she brought laughter, even if it was sharp-edged and quick to vanish. That night, they sat around a fire pit Jack had dug years ago, but never used. Rachel told stories about their childhood, about Jack as a boy who used to steal pies and get his ears boxed by their mother, about how their father left, and how Jack kept working until they could buy their own land. Leah listened, and for the first time, she saw the cracks in Jack's quiet. Not weakness, just a different kind of strength, the kind that held others up when everything else fell. You ever think about selling? Leah asked when they were alone again. Jack shook his head. Not once. She looked out at the field, the rows still half-tilled. Even if staying means trouble, His voice came soft. I think maybe staying is the only thing that ever mattered. Leah didn't answer, but when she looked over at Annie, asleep again under Rachel's borrowed blanket, she thought maybe he was right. Hope was still thin, but it was here now, stretching between them like a bridge made from quiet glances and shared work. And though Sawyer's shadow still hung out there in the hills, something stronger had taken root, something worth fighting for. The days grew longer, not in time, but in weight. The land still wouldn't yield, but the silence between Leah and Jack began to soften. It wasn't love, not yet, but something like trust, the kind that grows quietly when no one's trying to build it. Each morning began with a shared look, nothing said, just a nod and a mutual understanding. We're still here. Jack started leaving extra biscuits by the well, wrapped in cloth. Leah stopped saying thank you out loud, but she always met his eye when she handed the last one to Annie. One afternoon, Leah was patching a saddle strap in the barn when Jack came in holding a broken axle. He'd been trying to fix the supply cart, and something in his face, something unguarded, made her set down the leather strip. Need help? She asked. Jack blinked. You know wagons? My father ran a freight team back in Missouri, she said, brushing dirt off her skirt. Taught me how to repair them before I could write my own name. Jack hesitated, then handed her the axle. They worked side by side for hours, the quiet broken only by the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper and the occasional muttered curse when a bolt jammed. Jack didn't speak much, but he listened closely. When Leah explained something, he watched her hands, nodding along, asking only what mattered. It wasn't just respect. It was something deeper. He treated her knowledge like it belonged to someone worth listening to. When it will finally fit back into place and the cart rolled forward without a groan, Jack let out a small breath. Didn't think it'd work, he admitted. Leah shrugged. Most things don't, until they do. He looked at her then, really looked, and Leah felt her skin go warm in a way that had nothing to do with the sun outside. Later that night, Rachel cornered her in the barn. You like him, she said, arms crossed, one brow raised. Leah didn't respond at first. She brushed hay from Annie's blanket, eyes low. I don't have time for that, she muttered. Rachel leaned against the wall. He's not like the men you've known. Leah's jaw tightened. You don't know the men I've known. Rachel paused, sobering. No, but I know Jack. He's good at hiding what hurts him. But it's there. He carries it like a scar. Doesn't talk about the war, or what happened in Dunmore. Leah said nothing, but the word, Dunmore, settled between them like a thundercloud. Rachel pushed off the wall. You should know, though, when he cares, he won't leave. Not even if it means burning with you. She left Leah with that, and Leah sat there for a long while, staring at Annie's soft breathing, wondering what kind of man stays when the ground starts to fall in. The next day, they found a barn door swung open. Nothing was missing, but Jack's face went hard. He checked the locks, walked the fence line twice. The tracks outside were faint, half covered by wind, but Jack knew what they meant. Sawyer's sending a message, he said. Rachel spat on the dirt. Coward. Jack stayed up that night, rifle across his lap, watching the road. Leah stayed with him, arms wrapped around her knees. The moonlight lit the plains in pale silver, making even the wind look sharp. You think he'll come back? She asked. Jack didn't answer right away. Then, men like him don't like hearing no. Leah looked at the rifle. You ever had to use that? He nodded. Twice. Once in war. Once for something I won't talk about. She looked at him, waiting. Jack finally turned to her, his voice low. There was a woman once, before Sawyer and I split. She owned a small and off the cattle road near Red Bluff. Sweet woman. Used to make honey bread and feed the strays out back. Leah watched him still. She got in the way. Jack said, a man I worked for thought she heard something she shouldn't. I warned her, told her to run. She didn't listen. A long silence. She was pregnant, he added. Leah felt her stomach twist. I tried to stop it. Went to her house that night, but they were already there. I shot one. The other ran. She didn't make it. He looked away then, shoulders stiff. I left that night. Haven't touched that kind of life since. Leah reached over, fingers brushing his sleeve. Just a small gesture. But Jack didn't flinch. He let her stay there, her hand against his arm, as the wind pushed through the grass like something alive. They didn't speak again that night, but the silence between them was different now. Over the next week, work got harder. The well dipped low. 2 chickens went missing, likely stolen. Rachel rode out to town and came back with less than half what she'd bartered for. I heard Sawyer's name in 3 places, she said grim. He's stirring up cattlemen, telling M. Jack's squatting on prime land. Jack didn't respond, but Leah could see it in his jaw, tension wrapped tight as a wire. He started repairing the old root cellar out back, so they might need a place to hide if things went bad. That night, Annie woke from a nightmare, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Leah pulled her into her arms, rocking her back and forth, whispering her name. He was in the barn. Annie sobbed. He was looking at me. Leah's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. She held her close until her cries turned to hiccups and her eyes fluttered shut. The next morning, Jack nailed a board over the barn's rear window. I'll set a trap if he tries again, he said, voice flat. Leah touched his hand. He won't stop. Jack met her eyes. Then neither will I. But Leah's own fears were growing, deep under the surface. She hadn't told Jack everything. Not about her husband's debts. Not about the men who came asking after he died. And certainly not about the paper she still kept in the lining of her satchel. A notice from the marshal's office declaring her husband's wagon business bankrupt, and her name still on the records. It meant that if Sawyer or anyone like him ran her through the county books, they'd see her name tied to over $300 of unpaid freight loans. It wasn't a crime, but it was enough to make people turn their backs. No one liked a woman with baggage, especially the legal kind. One afternoon, while Jack was repairing the chicken coop and Rachel was out scouting fence lines, Leah sat with Annie near the well. Mama, Annie said, can we stay here forever? Leah looked down at her daughter's face, dirty and sun-kissed, eyes wide with something too close to hope. I don't know, baby, she said, but we'll stay as long as we can. Annie frowned. Do you think Jack likes us? Leah smiled faintly. I think Jack's starting to remember what it's like to have people. That evening, as the sun began to sink and turn the grass gold, Jack surprised Leah with something small, a carved bird, whittled from scrap wood, left on the windowsill. She turned it in her hands, the edges smooth from care. For Annie, he said, voice rough. She asked if I knew how. Leah swallowed. You're good at it. Jack looked away. My mother taught me. Leah set the bird down gently. You think we'll be ready if he comes? Jack met her eyes. No, but I won't let him take what's mine. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. The next morning brought another change. A deputy from town rode in, dust-covered and unsmiling. Jack, he said, you've got trouble. Sawyer's making claims. Says you're harboring fugitives. Told him marshal your girl here. He nodded toward Leah. Is tied to old debt fraud back east. Leah's heart nearly stopped. Jack stepped forward. She hasn't done anything wrong. The deputy raised a brow. Don't matter. Town's got ears. Folks are talking. Rachel stepped between them. So what? You here to drag her off? The deputy sighed. I'm here to tell you you've got maybe a week. Then the marshal rides out. Make sure you're clean by then. He turned and rode off. Jack didn't say a word. Just walked into the barn, slammed the door. Leah followed him in. You believe him? Jack turned, eyes blazing. I don't care what paper says, Leah. You think I give a damn about debts from 5 years ago? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The tears came before she could stop them. I didn't mean for any of it, she whispered. I just wanted Annie safe. Jack moved toward her, slow but sure. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He just pulled her into his arms and held her. And for the first time since she'd come west, Leah let herself cry. When she looked up, Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face. We're not leaving, he said. We fight this. Together. And for the first time, Leah believed him. Outside, the sun was high. The chickens clucked. The wind moved through the grass. And somewhere beyond the hills, Trouble was gathering. But for now, they had each other, and they weren't alone anymore. The rain came without warning. It struck hard just past midnight, tearing across the plains in a slanting sheet, wind howling like it had unfinished business. Leah jolted awake to the sound of thunder, her arms instinctively wrapping around Annie. The roof of the barn held, but barely. Each gust pushed against it like it meant to rip the whole thing away. Jack appeared a few moments later, soaked and breathless. "The north fence is gone," he said, water dripping from his sleeves. "Mule's missing. I gotta ride out." "No," Leah said, standing quickly. "Not alone. You need to stay with her," he said, gesturing to Annie, who sat upright now, eyes wide and frightened. "I'm not letting you get caught in Sawyer's hands," Leah said. "He's using this storm. You know it." Jack hesitated, then, wordlessly, handed her Rachel's old rifle from the barn's corner. "Stay in the stall. Keep her down low. I'll be back before dawn." He was gone before she could argue again. The wind rattled the walls. Rain pounded the roof. Leah held the rifle tight, her breath shallow, back against the barn post. Annie clung to her arm without speaking. Hours passed. When the door creaked open just before dawn, Leah almost pulled the trigger. But Jack stepped in, dragging the soaked mule behind him, bleeding from a gash on his arm. "Found her tangled in barbed wire 2 miles out," he said, voice thin with exhaustion. "And someone had cut the fence with bolt cutters. Clean. Precise." Leah stared. "Sawyer." Jack nodded once, then collapsed onto the dirt floor. Rachel rushed in from the house minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, and helped Leah patch his arm. The cut wasn't deep, but it was angry. Infected, maybe. They didn't have medicine. Not enough, anyway. Leah poured clean water over the wound while Jack grit his teeth, his jaw rigid. "We need to be ready," he said. "He's making moves." Rachel wiped blood from Jack's shirt. "You need rest." "I need a plan." Leah said nothing. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. She'd lived with fear for years. But from how familiar this all felt. Trouble, violence, promises made under roofs barely standing. She'd been here before. "You're not alone this time," she told herself. "Jack isn't like the others." But fear doesn't care about logic. The storm broke something open, not just on the land, but in all of them. Over the next few days, the mood shifted. Jack tried to get back to the field, but the injuries slowed him. Rachel took over much of the manual work. Annie clung closer to Leah than before. Even the animals grew restless, pacing and lowing like they felt what was coming. Then the letter arrived. A boy from town brought it, soaking wet and panting from the ride. Jack read it first, his hands steady. Then he passed it to Leah without a word. It was from the county court, a summons, naming Leah as part of a pending investigation related to her late husband's freight company and ongoing debtor concerns. A warrant wasn't issued yet, but the paper made it clear she had to appear in court by the end of the month or risk being detained. Leah stared at it, jaw locked. He filed it. Sawyer filed it, didn't he? Jack nodded once. "He's trying to force you out." "I don't even have anything left to owe," she whispered. "They took the wagon, the land, everything. Doesn't matter to men like him. It's not about what you owe. It's about how he can control you." The silence between them felt louder than the storm had been. Rachel stood nearby, arms crossed. "You're not going." Leah looked at her, then at Jack. "If I don't go, they'll send someone. And this time it won't be a letter." Jack spoke low. "Then we go together. You could lose this ranch." "I already almost did. I'm not losing you and Annie with it." That night, Leah couldn't sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the rafters. Annie curled beside her, breathing soft and warm. The fear in her chest had grown teeth. Not because of the court, not because of Sawyer, because of what she wanted now. She wanted this life, this quiet place. The sound of Jack's boots on the porch. The way Annie laughed louder now. The scent of hay and bread and safety. And wanting something meant it could be taken. By morning, a new decision had formed inside her. It burned. She waited until Jack was out in the fields and Rachel was washing clothes in the basin. Then she packed what little she had, blanket, biscuit crumbs, the wood-carved bird. She left a note on the table. Don't come after me. If I face them alone, maybe they'll let you keep this place. Tell Annie I'll come back. I promise. L. Then she took Annie by the hand, and they walked toward town before sunrise touched the hills. Jack found the note that evening. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with it in his hand, the silence pressing on his chest like a weight. Then he slammed his fist into the table so hard it cracked. Rachel came running. They're gone, he said, voice flat. Rachel grabbed the paper. She thinks she's protecting you. She's wrong. He went to the barn, saddled his horse, and rode out before Rachel could stop him. The trail was easy to follow. Leah hadn't hidden her path. He caught up to them 2 miles from town. Annie saw him first and called his name, voice shrill with relief. Leah turned, shot plain on her face. I told you not to come. Jack dismounted, his voice raw. And you think I was going to listen? She stepped between him and Annie. If they come for me, I'll go quietly. Jack closed the space between them slowly. You think I care about losing the ranch? It's everything you've built. It's wood, Leah. Nails and dirt. You think I'd have noticed the way Annie hums now? Or how you don't flinch when I stand behind you? He took a breath. That's what I built. With you. And I'm not letting you give it up. Leah looked down, tears welling. I'm so tired of losing. Jack cupped her cheek, his touch gentle. Then let's stop losing. They rode into town together. The marshal met them at the station. He was a narrow-eyed man with a trimmed beard and a badge that glinted even when the light didn't catch it. You're early, he said, glancing at Leah. Didn't expect you till next week. Jack stepped forward. You've got no case. You're holding her responsible for a dead man's mess. She signed those contracts, the marshal said. She didn't benefit from a cent. Her husband ran that wagon till it broke. And she spent every day since surviving. The marshal shrugged. You want to take it to court? We will. And the land you're sitting on? The marshal asked. That's contested too now. Sawyer's filed a lien on it. Jack didn't flinch. He forged documents. I've got witnesses. The marshal studied him. You really want this fight? I really want them safe. Leah stood taller beside him, eyes steeled. We're not hiding anymore. It didn't end in one day. The paperwork dragged. Hearings were scheduled. Sawyer sent men to intimidate them. One tried to light the barn on fire. Jack caught him before he struck the match. Leah stood at the courtroom door weeks later in a faded dress and told the judge every detail of what her husband had done, how she trusted him, how she'd been left with nothing but a child and death. The judge didn't smile, but he nodded once. And when they walked out of that courtroom, the summons had been dismissed. Later, Sawyer was caught forging 2 more liens. He fled town. Word had it he died in a shootout 2 counties north. Back at the ranch, Jack stood with Leah on the porch, the sunset staining the sky. You really were going to walk away, he said. She nodded. I didn't know what else to do. Jack looked out at the fields. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. Inside, Annie played with the wood bird on the floor, giggling. And for the first time, Leah smiled without fear catching her throat. They had survived the storm. But more than that, they had stayed. The land was still healing. So were they. But scars never disappeared completely. They stayed just under the surface, waiting for the wrong moment, the wrong word, the wrong memory. Leah had felt hers pulsing like a bruise since the court hearing ended. Even with Sawyer gone, even with the debt cleared, something inside her hadn't unclenched. She didn't talk about it. She worked. She cooked what little they had, mended tools, tended to Annie. But something in her had gone quiet again in that old familiar way that made Rachel squint at her, sometimes like she was trying to read smoke. Jack noticed too. He didn't press, just stayed close without crowding. His touches grew softer, longer, the kind of touches that said, you don't owe me anything, but I'll be right here anyway. The nights were calm now. The wind had stopped screaming. But Leah still woke in cold sweats, heart pounding, remembering her husband's face. Not how he'd looked in life, but how she'd imagined him when the sheriff told her he was dead. Eyes wide, mouth open, floating. One night, it all caught up. She was outside hanging wash clothes at sundown, the light coppery across the fields, when she saw something that didn't belong. A figure, far off, near the edge of the trees. Her breath caught. The memory hit hard. Her husband's voice yelling through the house. Annie crying under the table. The night he threw a lantern just to prove he could. The way he laughed after, drunk and mean. The sound of glass breaking. The figure moved closer. She dropped the basket and ran toward the barn, heart hammering. Jack was inside, fixing a hinge. I saw someone, she gasped. He stood quickly, eyes scanning the fields. Where? She pointed, but the figure was gone. Jack pulled the rifle from its shelf and stepped outside, scanning every tree line, every hill. Rachel came running from the house, Annie behind her, confused and pale. I swear I saw. Leah's voice cracked. Jack reached for her hand. It's all right. You're safe now. She blinked hard, chest rising and falling. No, I'm not. I haven't been for years. Rachel and Annie stood frozen. Jack turned to them. Go back inside. Lock the door. When it was just the two of them again, Leah leaned against the barn wall, hand over her heart. It's not just Sawyer or the court. It's him, my husband. I keep waiting for him to walk out of the woods. I know it's not logical. I know he's dead, but I can't stop feeling like I never got free. Jack knelt down in front of her, voice quiet. What did he do to you, Leah? She had never said it out loud, never even said the words abuse or hurt. But now, with the sky turning deep blue and Jack kneeling there like he was ready to take some of her weight, she let the words fall. He broke things. He didn't hit me, not with his hands, but with everything else. His words, his fists against the wall, the way he'd scream when Annie cried, and then blame me for not keeping her quiet. The way he'd disappear for days, then come back with wild eyes and blood on his shirt and expect me to act like nothing was wrong. Her voice trembled. I love him once, but by the end, I couldn't even look at him without flinching. Jack nodded slowly, and when he died, it didn't feel like grief. No, she whispered. It felt like guilt, because I was relieved. She sat down hard on the barn floor, legs folding beneath her. Jack sat beside her. You know what I think? She looked at him, tears wet on her face. I think you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. And I think the fact that you're still here, still standing, still raising Annie with kindness, that means you already won the fight he tried to bury you in. Leah stared at him, breathing heavy. I didn't know how to move forward, she said. Even after Sawyer, even after the court, I kept waiting for something else to come tear it down. Jack touched her hand, then stopped waiting. She looked down. I don't know how. Let me show you. He stood and reached for her. She took his hand. That night, Leah sat with Annie on the porch as the stars came out, the girl's head in her lap. Do you remember Daddy? She asked softly. Annie was quiet a long time. Not really, she said. I remember hiding. Leah closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Annie shook her head. I like it here. Jack doesn't yell. You smile more. And I sleep better now. Leah brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. I think we're going to be okay, Annie said sleepily. And for the first time, Leah didn't push the thought away. She believed it, even if just for the moment. The next day, Jack took them riding. The three of them, Leah, Annie, and him, across the back pastures, where wildflowers were starting to grow again, where the land, against all odds, was finally giving back. They stopped near the old dry creek bed, where water had started to trickle again. Jack pointed. Spring runoff. Might be good come summer. Annie chased a butterfly nearby, laughing. Leah stood beside him, breathing deep. What do you want now? He asked. She looked at him. Peace. You've earned that. And you? Jack hesitated. I want something that stays. Leah didn't answer, but she took his hand. The wind blew soft across the grass. The sound of healing wasn't loud. It was quiet, boots against earth, a child's laugh, two hands finding each other in the silence. For the first time, Leah didn't brace for it to end. The land, once dry and unforgiving, was turning green again. By late spring, The field surrounding Jack's ranch held shoots of wheat and patches of wild clover that hadn't grown in years. The creek bed behind the barn trickled soft and steady, its song barely audible but constant. Life was returning, not just to the earth but to them. Leah stood on the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand. The wind lifted her hair gently as she watched Annie chase a dog Jack had brought home 2 weeks ago, a scrappy, one-eyed mutt who worshipped the girl like she'd hung the moon. The dog had no name for a while, until Annie declared him Pepper, because he was tough but not mean. Jack stepped out onto the porch beside her, a hammer still tucked in his belt. "Fence mended," he said. "Chickens are back where they belong. Think they're testing me." Leah smiled without looking away from Annie. "They're smarter than we think." He nodded. "Like some people I know." They stood in easy quiet for a while. No tension, no weight, just space. Then a soft cough came from inside the house. Jack's mother, Clara, had been staying with them for a few weeks now, her health frail from a lingering illness that left her weak but not broken. She was a small woman, her silver hair pulled into a loose braid, her eyes sharp despite the way her hands trembled. Clara had come to the ranch after Rachel insisted, saying it wasn't right for her to be alone in town with her cough getting worse. Leah had taken to caring for her without being asked. She'd bring Clara warm broth, change the linens on her bed, and sit with her when the evenings grew cool, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Clara didn't talk much, but her gratitude showed in the way she'd pat Leah's hand, her fingers cold but firm. Annie, too, had found a friend in Clara. The two would sit together in the afternoons, Clara teaching Annie how to braid bits of straw into little figures, her voice soft but steady as she told stories of when Jack was a boy. Annie listened, wide-eyed, giggling when Clara described Jack falling into a mud patch while chasing a pig. Their bond grew quiet but strong, like a thread weaving through the days. Annie's chatter filling the silence Clara couldn't, and Clara's gentle presence giving Annie a kind of warmth she'd never known from a grandmother. One morning, as Leah brought Clara a cup of tea, the older woman looked up from her chair by the window. "You're good for this place," Clara said, her voice raspy but clear. "And for my boy. He's not so heavy now, with you here." Leah paused, the words sinking deep. She didn't know how to answer, so she just nodded, setting the tea down gently. Annie bounded in, holding a straw doll Clara had helped her make. "Look, Mama, Miss Clara says it's a horse." Clara smiled, a rare thing that lit her tired face. "It's a fine horse, Annie. You've got clever hands." Leah watched them, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. She turned back to the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup for Clara and sweeping the floor, her hands moving fast to keep the house in order. It wasn't just for Clara's comfort. It was for all of them, a way to make this place feel like it could hold them all together. "I've been thinking," Leah said later, voice soft, as she stood with Jack on the porch, "about staying." Jack didn't turn. "You already have. I mean, really staying, putting down roots, maybe buying into the land, making this something that's ours, not just yours." Jack looked at her now, eyes steady. "You don't owe me that." "It's not about owing," she said. "It's about choosing. And I've spent most of my life being dragged. This is the first place I've ever stopped running." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. The court had finally sent it last week. Confirmation that the debts were cleared. Her name, no longer tied to her husband's failures, was now her own again. Jack took it gently, looked it over, and then set it down on the porch railing like it didn't matter as much as she thought it might. "You were never just a name on paper to me," he said. And then, for the first time, she leaned in and kissed him. Not quick or desperate, but slow, like she had all the time in the world. Like she decided it was safe. The next morning, Jack asked Annie to ride into town with him. She climbed onto the saddle in front of him, arms looped around his. When they came back hours later, Annie hopped down with dirt on her cheeks and a crooked smile. "Mama," she called, "Jack bought you something." Leah walked out, wiping flour from her hands. Jack pulled a little tree from the wagon bed. "Young," fragile, wrapped in burlap and twine. "A peach tree," he said. "Figure we should plant something." Leah stared at it, her throat tightening. "You think it'll survive?" Jack shrugged. "Hard to say, but I've seen things come back from worse." Together, they dug the hole near the porch. Leah lowered the tree in, and Jack packed the earth around it. Annie patted the soil like she was tucking it in. They stood back afterward, arms brushed close. "I'll water it every morning," Annie said seriously. Jack looked at Leah. "It's yours, too. All of it." That night, they sat on the porch again, watching the moon rise over the hills. Pepper snored at their feet. Rachel was still out visiting a friend in town, but Leah had written her a letter the night before, thanking her for seeing what she herself hadn't yet seen, for pushing when Leah was too afraid to move. The barn stood solid. The fields were almost ready, and Leah, for the first time, was no longer haunted by what had come before. The scars were still there, but now they were just part of the map that had brought her here. Jack reached over, gently laced his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long time, not as two people surviving, but as three souls, healing, whole, and home.